Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at thedove.us. Well, today we have the high honor of having with us Governor Mike Huckabee. Now, you probably have read one of his 11 books. Perhaps you have watched him on Fox News. Maybe you voted for him in Arkansas. You voted for him when he ran for President of the United States. But now you have to go get his new book entitled God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. And there's a picture of it there on the screen. May I encourage you to get a copy of this book and read it. It is terrific, and it summarizes just about everything that concerns us. Governor, what an honor to have you today. Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, Perry. I appreciate it, and thanks for the kind word about the book. I hope it connects with people, and I think it does.
It really does. By the way, I have to tell you, I watched your webcast Sunday night from Hope, Arkansas. It was terrific.
Well, thank you. We hoped that what we could do with that webcast was just to bring some encouragement to people. It was not a political rally. It was really a spiritual event. The primary purpose is to say to people who are believers, you aren't alone. There are a lot of folks like you. Don't give up. But even if you are all by yourself, you're really not, because if God's with you, you're still a majority.
Well, you know, I have to say, you are a patriot pastor. The preach came out in you Sunday night.
Can't get rid of it, huh?
No, you can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of it.
25 years, but yeah, it's still there.
Attaboy. Well, don't let it ever go away. Governor, why'd you write this book?
One of the things that I observed over the past several years, Perry, is that I would go to places like New York, Washington, and Hollywood. Those are the nerve centers of America in terms of our culture. It's in those three, what I call bubbles of influence, that everything from fashion to finance, politics, government, movies, entertainment, pretty much everything in our culture is either created or certainly it's touched from there. But here's what I also realize, that the culture, the values, the lifestyle of the people who live in those three bubbles, very different than the culture lifestyle of the people who live in what we often call flyover country, or what I call the land of God, guns, grits, and gravy. So this book, conceived about 2 years ago, I started collecting examples, illustrations of how this country was polarized culturally, even as much as it is politically. And the result is the book, God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. A lot of people, by the way, Perry, think that it's a recipe book of Southern cuisine. It is not.
Well, I don't know. Grits and gravy do go together. And isn't Arkansas where the grits run into the gravy?
Pretty much, although in Arkansas we've often said that it's one of those states where gravy is considered a beverage.
That's terrific. Well, the culture, we're all concerned about it, especially those of us who are Christian. We're really concerned about it, and all of our praying and all of our concern doesn't seem to be changing it. What can we do, Pastor?
I think one of the challenges we face is just the will to stand up and speak up. So many people surrender at the first sign of opposition to their convictions. Today, Christians are clearly under siege. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but I'm telling you, when the President of the United States will reach back 1,000 years and bring up things that people in the name of Christ did, but he won't call out Islamic jihadism. When the government attacks the Little Sisters of the Poor and the Green family who own Hobby Lobby, and when local governments will go after Elaine's photography or Sweet Cakes by Melissa because they have convictions about marriage and try to put them out of business, and in fact do put them out of business. And Christians need to be very concerned, because no longer can we say that our values are the prevailing values that set the cultural template of America. But we can't come back. We can't really even live with our religious liberty that we're guaranteed under the Constitution if at the very first sign of opposition, we just raise the white flag, wave it, and surrender. So the first thing, stand up, speak up. And if we don't do that, then frankly, the battle's over and we lose.
Governor, it's been said that the hope of America now lies within the pulpits, with the pastor. Do you believe that?
I do. I think sometimes we have thought that if we elect the right people, that the election of certain people will lead to a spiritual revival. But I have long said, even before I got into politics, and one of the reasons that I got into it was to say, no, that's not how it works. But if we get the spiritual life of America right, then the political life of America will come along with it too. It's always in the order. God brings an awakening, and then the social order finds its way as a result of the spiritual order. But it's not that eternal things are affected so much by how we vote in an election, but how we vote in an election is definitely going to be reflected by the spiritual life of America.
Let me ask you a personal question. How did you go from pastor to governor? What went on in your heart, in your head, in your mind to make that transition?
Well, I think some people thought that it was just a one-step process. I preached one Sunday in my church, and I said, you know what, I think I'll just be governor next week. A little more complicated than that.
I'm sure it is, yeah.
My first vocation, and a lot of people probably don't know this because they just assume that my first vocation was, in fact, the ministry, but it was actually media, radio, television, advertising, writing, communications. That was my first career. I became a pastor and served 2 different churches for a total of 12 years. It was an incredible experience, and I have no doubt it was what the Lord wanted me to be doing during that period of time. My original goal was to one day get into politics. And then when I got into the pastorate, I just assumed that would never happen. I put it out of my mind and out of my heart. And then probably 10 and a half, 11 years into being a pastor, people started asking me, had I ever considered running for office? These are people who had no idea what I had originally thought as a young man in my life. And God began to change my heart, and I realized that a lot of the experiences that I had had in the pastorate had prepared me in a much better way than anything I could have done to have then gone into the realm of public policy and public office. So after really about a year and a half of praying about it, seeking spiritual counsel, I felt that was what I was compelled to do. I ran for the U.S. Senate and lost the race. Then I ran for lieutenant governor in Arkansas and shocked everybody when I won. The governor resigned because he got convicted of felonies after I'd been reelected lieutenant governor. Then I became governor, reelected twice, and the rest is, that they say, history.
You are the longest serving governor in Arkansas's history, right?
Third longest Republican governor for
Republican,
sure.
okay, right.
When close to me was only 4 years. So more than 2.5 times what anybody had served as a Republican. But there were only 3 Republicans ever elected to statewide office before me. And the 2 governors who served longer in the days prior to term limits for governors were Orville Faubus and Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, I guess, served about a year longer than me, and Orville Faubus a year and a half longer than me.
Wow. It's interesting. I didn't know that about you. In fact, some ways our paths are very similar, as I was in ministry, Bible college, media, and was Republican chairman of the state for several years, and then our son went on to become a state senator. I lost him sitting in Congress by 1 vote. So the power of 1 vote.
It does make a difference.
It
People
certainly
sometimes
does.
Pretend that it doesn't, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Governor, is there hope for America? We're pretty messed up. We got a lot of problems. A lot of people are turning their back, turning their heads, and saying, what's the use? And especially Christians, they have this mentality, oh, well, this all plays into eschatology. Why bother? This is part of God's plan. How would you respond to that?
Well, I don't know how they can read the New Testament and believe that our job is to roll over and play dead. I mean, Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. We're commanded to go and to have an impact in our world. We were never told to crawl up under the bed and go to sleep. That's never what we're told to do. And the idea that, well, it's all coming toward the end of the world, it may be, but that doesn't mean we're to escalate it and make it happen more quickly because of our inattention to the commands of the gospel. When people say, is there hope? Yes, there is. But I'll tell you, the hope isn't going to happen if we don't show up. And by showing up, let me give an example. There are 80 million self-identified evangelicals in America. 80 million.
Yeah.
Of those, only half are even registered to vote. And of those, only half vote in a presidential election. And of those, only half vote in an off-year election. I'll give an example in the last election. If Mitt Romney had had just 4% more evangelical voters, I'm not talking about Catholic voters mainline denominational voters, just evangelical, he would have been president today. Clearly, one of the frustrations that I have is that a lot of people in our churches who say, boy, our world's really, really just morally in decline. And then you say, well, did you vote? Well, no, it doesn't make any difference. Well, yes, it does. And you're not voting is the difference that it's made. We have to awaken our people.
Wow. Let me ask one more question before we take a break. When you were doing the show on Fox, and by the way, I commend you. I hardly missed any of your shows. And one thing that was very interesting to me is your gifting to take those who you disagree with and have a very healthy dialogue with. That was remarkable.
Well, it was one of the things that I enjoyed most about the show. And I've often said that if the people I have a conversation with are people who agree with everything I say, and whenever I say something, they say, oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, you're right. Oh, boy, you're really, really, really right. Then it's not much of a conversation.
No.
But if I can have a conversation with people in a civil manner, but people who don't agree with me, I find value in that. I get traction from that. I learn something from them. I hope they learn something from me. May not change their mind. They probably won't change mine. But I remember that in the Gospels, Jesus, he conversed with people he didn't agree with. He went to the house of Zacchaeus. He talked to people who were really the outcast from his own band of religious people. The people he had the most difficulty communicating with were the hyper-religious people, the people in the temple. But the down and outers and the folks that really were this polar opposite morally and spiritually, those were the people with whom he was able to connect and whose lives he ultimately changed and challenged.
All right, let me take a quick break. We'll be right back with Governor Mike Huckabee and his new book, God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. There's a picture of it there on the screen. Let me encourage you to get a copy of this. It's remarkable. His ability to communicate his faith in all of these issues, which represents all of us, is really a gift. And let me encourage you to get a copy. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and our special guest today is Governor Mike Huckabee, and what an honor to have him. You've probably seen him on Fox. You've read some of his other books. His new book is out called God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. Let me encourage you to get a copy of this book. It's just remarkable and does so well. You know, a couple things in the book, Governor, that's so interesting. You feel you're out of place in Washington, D.C., but you may be the top guy there someday. How do you handle that one?
I've told people that there's only one address. One of the things I mentioned in the book, there's only one address in all of Washington that I would be interested in moving to. So I'll let you figure out which one that might be, and it might provide some little hint of what I may attempt to do later this year.
Okay. Why are guns so important to you?
It's not so much the guns themselves, it's the freedom that comes from the ability to own firearms, which is really owning a means of protecting oneself, one's family, and one's property. Our founders believed that this was a sacred right, that we had a fundamental right to defend ourselves, not only against criminals, and this is going to sound a little bit out there, but hear me out. The context of the Second Amendment was that the founders knew that what they were doing in creating America was rebelling against their own government, which had become a tyranny. They were unshackling themselves from their government, and they had to fight their way out of it. They wanted to ensure that future generations would always have the capacity to be able to overthrow tyranny, whether it was the tyranny of an armed robber, or whether it was the tyranny of their own government. And they knew that that could not happen if people were held hostage by their own government or by a criminal. So they gave us the Second Amendment not to preserve our rights to hunt. I know a lot of times people say, well, this is all about hunting. No, it isn't. And I love to hunt, don't get me wrong. But the Second Amendment is there to protect our freedom. So for me, this isn't about how many guns do you own because, gee, that's cool. It's how much do you really value your personal liberty? What are you willing to do to preserve and protect it?
Beautifully said. If you become president, what would you do to stop the Holocaust of abortion?
Well, for one thing, we need to cut off any funding that goes toward those who promote or carry out this incredible genocide of abortion. I think we also, as we need a better job of explaining to the American people why this issue matters. The president has the bully pulpit. I want you to think about something. Look how far this country has shifted, and I would say, unfortunately, how far it's shifted on the issue of same-sex marriage. And it shifted in large measure because the President of the United States has now become the biggest cheerleader for same-sex marriage, even after saying that he didn't believe in it. Imagine what happens if a president really can articulate why the issue of sanctity of life matters. And the reason that it matters is because, going all the way back to the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this notion that every life is equal means that there is no such thing as a life that's expendable or disposable, that every life has value and has intrinsic worth. And that's what I would love to be able, as a president, to articulate to America and explain to them why that if we ever devalue one person's life, we've ultimately devalued all of our lives.
Oh, that's beautifully said. What an inspiration. All right. I want to ask you a favor.
Okay?
If you become president and it's your first State of the Union address and you're standing there in the House chamber at the podium, would you force the national cameras to scan above your head about 8 to 10 feet and comment on what's etched in marble there, "In God We Trust"?
Well, if the camera wouldn't find it, I'd love to be able to quote it, but I'd also love to quote from the inscriptions on the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, many other great sayings from the people who helped create the United States of America. And I would remind them that no matter what they're told today by those who would like to rewrite and revisit history, the fact is America was founded by people who, even if in their personal lives they were not the most devout individuals, they believed that this nation could not exist nor be able to stand without a strict adherence to the Judeo-Christian understanding that we are ultimately accountable to God and we have to live by God's natural law. And that should be something that people are introduced to, because I think a lot of people have never heard that before.
Wow, it's great. How would you address the rift within the Republican Party from what they would call the establishment versus the conservative / Tea Party? There's a little sign over your left shoulder that says, "Let us come and reason together." You think we can do that?
I know we can. And the reason I know that, and one of the reasons that I'm open to running for president, is because when I became governor of Arkansas, I inherited the bluest state in the country, the most lopsided legislature in all of America. Most people don't know that, but it was more blue than Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, California. 89 out of 100 House members and 31 out of 35 Senate members were all Democrats. I had a tiny little minority, just a few voices of Republicans. And I can assure you that it was not the most welcoming environment that I stepped into. I didn't walk to the Capitol every day and they said, "Oh, great, let's see what we can do to make this guy look good and be successful." But you know what, Harry? I learned how to govern. And I learned that if I follow that inscription that you see over my shoulder, I had it sitting on the mantle in my office at the governor's office, Capitol in Little Rock, and it said, "Come, let us reason together," quoted from Isaiah. And that's what I believe, that you couldn't compromise your core convictions or your values, but you certainly could work with people and find out what it is that they're really wanting. And sometimes you could help give that to them to get something that you really wanted without compromising your biblical beliefs. And that's what we see lacking in government today, especially in Washington.
You continue to poll very well. I've never seen you below 5. You're somewhere around 3, 4. This early in the game, you and Ben Carson seem to be kind of interesting people in the race that continue to poll well. Maybe it's time that the United States has a pastor and a brain surgeon to run things.
Well, I think, look, we couldn't do any worse than what's happening now. I mean, under any circumstance. Ben Carson's a good man, and I like him a lot. He's a wonderful believer, and he's also lived a truly American life and a great, great example.
All right, Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is due in town March 3rd. There's been some people wanting to cancel that. He seems to be fairly determined to come and speak. Some senators are saying no, they won't be there. Maybe some House members may turn their back on it. And even the Vice President now may be too busy to be there. This could be his most important speech ever. What do you think?
Well, it very well could be. He's going to tell the Congress something that the president apparently doesn't want to tell them, and that is that Iran represents a very serious and existential threat to America. I've known the prime minister for many years. He's a personal friend. I'll see him next week. I'll be in Israel. I was there 3 times last year alone. My first trip to Israel was back in 1973, 42 years ago, when I was all of 17 years old. And I've been back so many times I've lost count of the number of trips. The one thing I know about Israel, and I also know about Benjamin Netanyahu, is that they can't afford to be wrong on the issue of national security. They're a tiny little country, about the size of New Jersey. They're surrounded by enemies. They have repeatedly been threatened with their very existence. And Iran has repeatedly threatened to wipe them off the face of the map. A nuclear Iran is an immediate threat to the very existence of Israel. They understand that. What America doesn't understand is a nuclear Iran is a direct threat to a free America. And if the prime minister can come and to convey that message, the White House might not be willing to listen, but I think the American people will be willing to listen.
Do you think the prime minister understands that for the most part, the faith community in America, for the most part, is with him, even though this administration is not?
Well, I hope so. I think so. And that's one of the messages that I will certainly convey to him in person when I see him next week. I think he understands that the views of this administration are not reflective of the views of the vast majority of America. But I know it must be difficult for him because he's always had a great relationship with whoever the president was, Democrat or Republican. And I know how challenging it is for the prime minister, as much as it is for all of us, to watch this administration be so hostile, so utterly contemptuous of Israel. And it makes no sense at all because it's the only real ally we have in the Middle East, the best friend we have, and the one that most mirrors our own form of government. It's why that 2 years is about all we can take of more of this current administration leading foreign policy.
You know, I asked that question to a very prominent rabbi there, and he said, well, we'd like to believe that, but you did re-elect him. And that sent a bad message. Sent a bad message.
It certainly did, but I think the last election for president was much more about the mechanics of the election than it was about the message of the election.
No question.
But it's another reminder that this is why people have to register to vote and be faithful in voting, because if not, you end up with what we've ended up with in this country for the past 6 and soon to be 8 years.
Well, Governor, thank you. I know your time is very tight. I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for what you did on Fox News all those years. You taught me as a broadcaster how to handle conflict, and I learned much by watching you. But how can we pray for you now?
Well, just pray for God's wisdom to be not only in my life as I finalize the decision as to whether I run, but you know what? Pray that God would raise up the Aarons of the world to hold up my hands, to provide the funding, to provide the prayer support, the political ground support. Because even if I say yes, there's still got to be the people who serve in what I call the Aaron Brigade, the ones who hold up the arms when they get weary. So that's my prayer, and it's what I ask people to pray for.
Well, we certainly will be doing that. I also hope that you will run for a lot of reasons. One of which is that you would be that strong Christian voice in the arguments, in the debate, that you bring that spiritual balance that I think America really needs, and I think also really wants. I think there is a hunger for a spiritual balance to be put back into America.
Well, I hope so, Perry, and I guess we're about to find out.
Okay. Thank you, my friend. Best to you, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Thank you very much. God bless.
God bless.